Il marche pas? Celui-ci marche? Vous m'entendez? Ah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ecology in Society session. Just a small precision first. We won't do another break at the end. We did a longer one instead. I hope that's fine. And then it's a pleasure for us to welcome Irene Teixidor Tonu for the keynote talk of the session. So Irene, you did interdisciplinary PhD in ethnobiology at the University of Reading, and there you studied the cultural transmission of knowledge about medicinal plants in the Amazigh communities in the Moroccan High Atlas, and you finished your PhD not so long ago, just in 2017, so a very young researcher. And then you got the Research Council of Norway postdoctoral fellowship to implement a new research project on historical ethnobiology, and this took you to the University of Oslo. And there you studied the long-term evolution of Scandinavian knowledge about plants in collaboration with historians, archaeologists, and botanists. And then you got, in 2022, a professor tenure track at the IMB in Marseille. So now you focus your research on the future of this knowledge and with a special interest in wild plant gathering practices. And so your talk today is going to be about the human-nature relationships through the lens of reciprocity, and you will illustrate these with insights from indigenous and local knowledge systems.
I guess I need to speak here because of the recording, right? Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. First of all, many thanks to the organizing team for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. I just learned about this conference very recently, and I think it's such a wonderful initiative that you PhD students do it for yourselves. It's great. So congrats to you all. Yes. So the talk I'll present today, as Agustin said, it's called Human-Nature Relationships Through the Lens of Reciprocity, Insights from Indigenous and Local Knowledge Systems. This works mostly. So mostly from indigenous and local knowledge systems, but you will see that throughout the talk. I'll also present a number of examples and case studies that are of other systems, of other people and nature interactions. Here, there. Okay. Thanks. Still not working. I'll just use the button. Before I start, I'm going to show you 3 pictures. So that's the first. This is the first one, and I want you to look at them and see if you find something that they have in common. So this is the first picture. Here's the second one, and I'm really sorry about the quality. I really didn't think it was going to be so big, but I guess you get the idea. And this is the third one. And here are the 3 together. Does anybody have any idea of what these 3 pictures have in common? Yes? Raise your hand, maybe. So, no? Over there? Yes, there are trees. Yes? Yes? Oh, that's interesting. No, I haven't got that far. Other than trees and the fact that there is no built infrastructure in the sense of like roads and buildings, what these 3 pictures have in common is centuries and centuries, and in some cases millennia of human-nature interactions. These 3 pictures show 3 landscapes that are extremely manicured by human actions, by human institutions, by people and generations living in the land and doing something in some way in the land. So the first one is a picture of the High Atlas, and it's an agropastoralist landscape, but it's the only one that is an agropastoralist landscape, where this part of the mountains is an area that has a very carefully regulated access system of norms that regulate the access to these lands. So pastoralists are only able to go to these mountains at a particular time of the year when the flowering and fruiting of the grasses is completed. The second one is an agroforestry system in Madagascar. Again, what we look at is not a primary forest, it's a forest that has been cultivated and planted generation after generation. And so the trees that are in this picture that we cannot really see because it's such poor quality are to a large extent cultivated trees. And the third one is a landscape from Australia that you may know that traditionally Australian arid and dry areas have been managed by fire regimes. So Aboriginal Australians would burn specific areas, specific patches at times of the year when they could control these fires, creating a mosaic that effectively would protect them and also the fauna and flora of these landscapes against much more big and extensive fires. So when we see the pictures, just by looking at them, we don't necessarily think about the people that are there or have been there and have contributed to make these landscapes what they are. And what I'll talk about today is a little bit like how can we train ourselves to see these relationships. When I read the abstracts of the 3 people now, there were 4 before, that were going to present in this ecology and society session, there are basically 2 themes that came up that were represented by the presentations. And these are also 2 themes that are very much recurrent in ethnobiology. And that is what people do to the environment, in the environment, with the environment, and what the environment does to people. So how these relationships contribute to co-creating landscapes and societies in sometimes a co-evolutionary relationship, and also how all these relationships are interpreted by people and how they lead to pro-environmental values sometimes, non-pro-environmental values some other times. So I'll talk about these 2 views, specifically the first one. And then I'll finish by talking a little bit about how reciprocity, the concept of reciprocity, can be an agent of transformative change. So I guess everybody's familiar here with the term transformative change. What I'll talk about and the concept of reciprocity in itself has been studied and has been written about by a number of scholars, and perhaps the most prominent is Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's an indigenous scholar in the US, who wrote this beautiful book. I highly recommend it to anybody. It's written in a very narrative flow and very easy to read, actually, that basically talks about reciprocity. And grounded on this work and the work of many other scholars, recently there was a publication called Reciprocal Contributions Between People and Nature by Jaime Ojeda and Natalie Van and others. And with them, we continue to work on reciprocity, and we recently completed a special volume that has the same title as the talk. So I'll talk a lot about what we did through this special volume that brought together case studies and research from across the world. So reciprocity is a way of living and being in the world, of relating to each other and with nature that is enacted in culture-specific ways. So when we talk about reciprocity here between us, it's not the same. It's not necessarily expressed in the same way as it may be by Baka people in Cameroon, as you will see in a bit. Through the work in the special volume, we didn't came up with a definition of what reciprocity is, because we acknowledge that the term can be approached by scholars from different disciplines, but also, as I said, from people from different cultures with different views and different ways of expressing what reciprocity means to them. And we sort of acknowledge this plurality. But several definitions came to the notion that reciprocity can be encoded in the culture. So it can be a norm that regulates the relationships between people and nature. Many of the definitions kind of brought this idea of exchange. There is something that happens between different entities that connects these different entities. So reciprocity is about connection and exchange between people and the environment. And for example, Spencer Greening, an indigenous scholar from British Columbia, he talks about a culture of gratitude where nature is perceived as giving to people, and thus people have a sense of indebtedness, a gratitude that they want to act upon by doing certain things or doing things in a certain way. So he is a mountain goat hunter, and the way that he hunts, the way that he approaches the prey, and the rituals that he does, the moments at which he hunts, is all regulated by this notion of nature gives to us, in this case for food, for materials, and also for meaning. And so we have a specific way of interacting with nature. But this sense of indebtedness, for example, is not common across cultures. Baka people in Cameroon don't feel indebted. For them, nature gives and people give, and everybody. The way that these relationships are understood are that everybody's kind of duty is to give. So there is no indebtedness. So different ways of perceiving these relationships. What I like about this definition is that Simon Hoyte and Felix Mongombe said that reciprocity is enacted through actions, interactions, and experiences. So things that happen, there are things that happen between people and nature that are concrete in time and space. And so these things that happen between humans and other elements of nature that we can represent in a very simplistic way, like this. But what I want to show here, and it comes back to the title, these perspectives, these indigenous and local knowledge perspectives, is that for many peoples, the human is integrated within a network of relationships of other elements of nature. So the human is not aside, is not separate above or special or below, but is part of these relationships. And in some cases, there are what we call kincentric relationships with elements of nature. So there are relationships of kinship. People can perceive animals or plants as brothers and sisters, as the mother. This is very common, but it's not necessarily the case everywhere. And for the sake of simplicity, we're going to cherry pick. We're going to choose one relationship, a person, in this case, that forages, and a plant, to talk a little bit more about these actions, interactions, and experiences that happen kind of back and forth between these two elements, I would say, the person and the plant. And, well, this is because I'm on holidays and I haven't prepared enough. So my first two examples are actually not about plants, but relationships with animals. These two examples are part of the special volume, and the first one is the one on the left, is a study about a behavioral ecology study of dolphins and fishermen fishing together, and what happens when dolphins and fishermen fish together versus fishing separately. There are quantitative gains in terms of the fish that are fished by the two parties, but also social gains. There is a connection and attachment that happens between the fishermen and the dolphins, and this kind of attachment also happens between fishermen and seabirds in Chile. Sorry, the first example is in Brazil, and the second one is from Chile. And in this case, small fishers would, for example, read the behavior of the birds to know where the fish are, go fishing, and then instead of taking the fish back to the shore to be cleaned, they will spend the time on the boat to clean the fish on the boat and feed the offal to the birds. And then there is this relationship that is established, this time spent together between the fishermen and the fish, and fishermen will tell you like how important it is for them, this companionship relationship. If anyone has pets, I guess you can understand these attachments that we can have to other species. And this idea of reciprocity, this back and forth, questions other kinds of other conceptual frameworks that try to explain relationships between nature and people that are unidirectional. And kind of the star here is ecosystem services, where nature provides some benefits, some services to people that sometimes can even be monetized. And people are an entity, a part of this conceptual framework that only receives. So reciprocity kind of questions these unidirectional flows and questions this capitalist idea that we can monetize nature and that nature provides and we accumulate. And I'll give you 3 examples on why, when we read human-nature relationships with this idea of reciprocity in mind, this idea that nature only gives becomes is not so certain, not so clear. So, for example, Mariam Akedi, she's doing research in the High Atlas in Morocco, and these are 2 quotes from her fieldwork. The first one is from these women, and they say, "Our children, when they're hungry, they can cry and ask for food, but animals cannot, especially during harsh winters, and it's our duty to protect and care for them." So women will regularly give grain for birds, for example, or in summer they will put pans of water outside for wild animals. They don't get any benefit out of it. They just do it out of this sense of connection. And they will also say, or they also said, nature is not something that we own. It's a gift from our creator that we must honor and protect. Another way in which reciprocity is enacted in some cultures, in some communities, is through the belief that if this reciprocity is not fulfilled, if too much is taken from nature, there's some kind of punishment that will happen, that will come from nature or from one of these entities. And this is the case, for example, among Mongol communities of pastoralists. They believe that if a person, a herder, overgrazes a part of the pasture because perhaps they want to have more animals and sell more meat, they will be punished. There will be extreme weather events, especially in winter, which they call dzut, that will not only impact them, but impact also the animals and the other herders around them. And the last one is an example close to home that comes off the research of Jonathan Lockville. Some of you met him because he did his PhD here in the CEF. And he worked with professional foragers in Massif Central and other parts of France. And he, talking with them, he realized that professional foragers, even if they livelihood, the money they make, the money that they need to live, to pay the rent and send the kids to school, etc., they will trade off some of this economic value of foraging for other kinds of value, social value and environmental value. So they may harvest less in order to preserve a foraging area in a specific conservation state. They may harvest less to have good relationships with their neighbors, with the landowners where they forage, with the administration. So there is this trade-off idea and these back and forth relationships. Something is taken, something is given. And the way that we talk about these interactions and experiences and actions is through what we call stewardship practices and nature contributions to people, rather than ecosystem services. And if you want to know why I choose this term and not the other, we can talk about it later. And I just wanted to make a specific focus here that very much purposely, through this research that we did and we are doing on reciprocity, we focus on positive interactions. Interactions between people and nature that have some positive outcomes according to someone, because we can always value positive or negative. It depends on how you look at it. But this is very much purposeful. So this is not to negate that human activities behind the environmental crisis that we face today, behind climate change. We're very much completely aware of this, But the idea of focusing on reciprocity came a bit to question, like, oh, okay, well, are humans doing anything positive? Have they done anything positive? If so, what is it, and how does this happen? And can we learn something about it to perhaps try to change the way that we're doing things? So the positive bias is very much assumed. And as I said before, we did came up with a bunch of case studies where these positive outcomes are perceived and are also ecologically measured. And you can read about them in the special volume if you're interested. So kind of the take-home messages of this work were that humans can, and according to many indigenous scholars, they should play an active role in supporting other components of nature and having a positive impact on the environment. That stewardship practices are contributions that people make to the environment. So humans do something actively to have a positive impact in the environment according to their own judgment. And that there is a mutual well-being that can be established through this ongoing expression of reciprocity. And these actions, interactions, and experiences can be studied or can have impacts at different levels. So at genetic, species, community, ecosystem levels, at landscape level, and then also at individual, social group, and community levels, and at cultural levels. Yes. And to go a little bit more in depth on this idea of stewardship practice, now I will focus on foraging as an example of one of these interactions, of these relationships that is often perceived as unidirectional. So when we look at the IPBES Sustainable Use of Wild Species report, I don't know if anyone here is interested or has read it. There is a whole part of the report about gathering, which is described as an extractive practice, and is all about removing something, removing a part of a plant, the whole plant, and this removing can have an impact on the sustainability of a population. And this is actually copy-pasted definition of gathering. They do say in the end of the definition that the effects of this gathering on the population sustainability are contingent on how this gathering happens, how often it happens, where it happens. But that's about it. And so our work and the work of many other colleagues on stewardship adds to this idea that gathering and foraging is just taking something. So yes, there is something that is taken. People go out to look for a part of a plant that they want to use as medicine, as food. Those of you that are interested in pro-environmental values, there's a talk later, will know that by going out and spending time looking for something, there's an impact on the person because you have spent time outside, and there are many psychological studies that show that just that has an impact on our well-being. So foraging will also imply that you know where you're going, that you have invested in knowing about what you're looking for. And if you can see a little bit the pictures, it's not just about picking, but then there is all these other practices that happen when people go foraging. So they will go and pick, but they will also sometimes contribute to vegetative reproduction of species by cutting up, like splitting bulbs, for example, and replanting them, spreading seeds. Sometimes there is actual replantment. There will be management of the landscape, etc., etc. And so stewardship practices are defined as actions that individuals or groups or networks of actors take with various motivations and levels of capacity to care for and responsibly use the environment. And this has an impact, an environmental and a social impact. These actions can be also understood as an ethic, as a way of looking at the world. There are specific motivations and there are specific outcomes, as I was saying. And they are modulated through care, knowledge, and agency. So if we go back to this definition of the IPBES report, which says that the effects on population sustainability are contingent upon factors including timing, frequency, and intensity. This is very blonde and kind of theoretical. What I would like you to imagine is that there is people behind, like there's people who gather, there are individuals who gather, and these individuals will have a certain feeling of care or not, they will have a certain knowledge or not, and they will have a certain agency or not. These are the three main dimensions of stewardship. So people will have feelings of attachment towards species or towards places where they forage and feel some degree of responsibility or not. They will have different knowledge. So people may know a lot or very little. What we find when we work with foragers is that, especially people who forage a lot, is that they either will have learned from their families, or they will have trained themselves, or they will have spent so much time outside that they will have observed, and they will know a lot from experiential knowledge acquisition. But then what they can actually do will be modulated by what we call their agency, their ability, their capacity to act. So we may very well know that we need to harvest after flowering and after fruiting of a species in order for the species to be able to reproduce. But we may not be in the capacity to do that because there's a conflict situation and we need to feed our children and there's no choice. So the fact that we know and the fact that we care does not necessarily mean that we can act upon it. Or we may have always foraged across different mountain ranges, but now there is a park that is established, and so a part of the area where we used to forage is not accessible anymore, and thus we have to do with less space, etc., etc. And again, like 3 examples just to illustrate a little bit this idea of stewardship practices. This one is from Ecuador. These are commercial foragers that harvest the seed of a palm, and that have put in place, they carry out stewardship practices towards the palm species in order to improve the reproduction success, I guess you would call it, of this palm. And here are 3. So there would be like clearing the grounds of the forest, clearing the dead palm leaves, which will avoid like rotting, for example, and illnesses affecting the plant. And there will be like transplantation. And these actions have an impact on the species, but they also have an impact, kind of a cascading impact on the network, the trophic networks of the forest, because the seeds of the palm are eaten by lots of herbivores, and thus these places become kind of feeding grounds for a lot of the fauna in the forest. Another example of stewardship practices for foraging, again from Chile, are these intertidal ponds that people built that effectively increase the microhabitat for spawning of spawning grounds of this fish species, Pirenes, of which the eggs are consumed. But again, the construction of these intertidal ponds will also have effects beyond the species for which it is meant, as it builds habitat for other species. And then the last one is from Norway, from Stavanger, so the southernmost part of Norway, where foragers will forage like a number of species, but this is about Cachille maritima. I don't know if you know it, but it's a wild leafy vegetable. You can eat it as a vegetable, and it's like the kind of grayish-green plant in the bottom picture. And these coastal habitats are also invaded by Rosa rugosa, an invasive rosa species. And here you can see a forager who's picking Rosa rugosa as they go also harvest for Cachille maritima, thus contributing to the invasive species strategy of the government, even if they have nothing to do with the government. And we have gone quite a bit of length to try to classify and enumerate all these stewardship practices in an attempt to bring awareness and try to stimulate more research on these practices. But I won't go into detail here. And what we learn as we've been doing this work is that the more you look at it, the more you find these practices everywhere in the world, specifically among foragers, but also among other relationships. And yet, these practices are kind of neglected in policy. And this is an example from Estonia. Again, a little archipelago off the coast of Estonia, where people have been harvesting eggs of seabirds specifically for centuries, as the pictures on the top show. And they have also been managing the nests, like putting up infrastructure to be used as nests by these species. And you can see a couple of pictures in the bottom. And these relationships were very much broken when the European Union Birds Directive came into effect, I think in 1979, which this conservation directive forbids any collection of wild bird eggs. So the practice was forbidden. And effectively what happened was that there was no more regulation of the number of the species that were reproducing and the proportion of eggs that were being left of each species. And since then, seagull and cormorant populations have exploded and thus become pests, and other bird species have dwindled. And then, of course, there has been a very negative effect on Kinu culture, who were not able to carry on this practice, and thus you can imagine that all the traditions that can be around it are also lost. And there are many reasons why this can happen, why we are not able to see these relationships between people and nature that have happened in a place for a really long time. One of them is that we are trained to look at landscapes, specifically avoiding seeing people in them. And this is a picture of a place where I did some of my practical field courses when I was studying ecology. So we would go to this typical Mediterranean landscape. It's completely been under the hands of humans for millennia. And we would go to the forest part over there, and we would walk some 20, 25 meters to get away from the edge effect and look at the forest plant species communities in this part. As you're far away from anything that humans have done to be seeing something that is natural. And then we reproduce the same in some other parts that supposedly was natural. And we were trained to not see these relationships. But thankfully enough, there is a current in research today that advocates for transdisciplinary research, for different perspectives to be brought together to understand human and nature relationships. So not just across disciplines, but also across knowledge systems. So in Latin America, for example, they talk a lot about diálogo de saberes. And there have been different concepts that have been developed to bring methods to work together. And one of them is this two-eyed seeing. So a combination of reading of a particular research question through a Western academic lens or through an indigenous or other non-academic knowledge system lens. And this concept was developed by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. Yet when we try to do this, when we try to bring together different knowledge systems to understand a relationship between human and nature, to understand an impact of a human activity in nature, here are kind of awareness red flags that we need to be aware of. Different knowledge systems are what we call incommensurable. You cannot understand one system completely from the point of view of the other. There are aspects of this system that we will not be able to understand. For example, a healer, even in Morocco, where I did my PhD, a healer in the High Atlas Mountains will believe that Jinni, Junun, have an impact on children's health because someone did something at a particular moment, and the kid was around and got a smell of the Junun, and that's what got them sick. We will not be able to explain this through an academic perspective, but people do believe that. And we cannot cherry pick what we like from these other knowledge systems and leave the other parts aside. There's a learning to do to be able to work together with the knowledge that we won't be able to understand everything. So there is a awareness needed at an epistemological level. The different knowledge systems don't have the same way to produce knowledge and validate knowledge. There is awareness needed at an ontological level. What reality is not the same for everybody. At ethical level, not everybody, not all the knowledge systems will have the same moral responsibilities. And there is especially awareness to be had because we have different positions of power in these relationships. So if you're working in a research project in collaboration with indigenous knowledge holders, if you're holding the money and you're paying them, you are not equals in terms of the political relation, and you must be very much aware of that. So what can we do? Well, we can become educated, try to learn about the fact that relationships between people and nature can be different than what we anticipated them. We can learn, but also unlearn, as I just showed you with the fieldwork picture. And be mindful that building these relationships will also need on our part, like the academic part, an awareness that there has been a passive of relationships between researchers and other knowledge holders. So be ready to move slowly, take time, spend time, lose time. It is a slow process, but I very much recommend it. And I still have time, right? Good. So the last, I just wanted to finish with a couple of slides from some of our recent work in the High Atlas. People and the relationships between people and nature have always changed through have always changed. We always talk about this dynamic aspect of indigenous and local knowledge systems. And at present, we are starting to study how this what is actually change and what are the changes that are affecting these reciprocal relationships. And the picture that you see here is a result of a literature review where we coded all the changes that have been identified in the literature about the High Atlas. And you can see that there is, in blue, some kind of like natural system changes. There's climate change, there's biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, and so on. But this is just a part of the picture. There are also changes in demographics, in economy, in policy, in culture, in governance. And if we don't take time, we tend to forget about this complexity of changes. And the fact that people and their relationships with place are trying to deal with all these changes at the same time. And here, just as an example, in the High Atlas, I don't know if you're aware, but I guess all around the Mediterranean, we have seen many years of drought. That's not different there, and it's perhaps even more extreme there. So there have been, except for this year, when it rained, there have been 7 years with almost no rain, which means that plants were growing much slower, and thus all the foraging that was happening in specifically these parts of the mountains that are where there are no trees had to be reevaluated, and people put in place rotational systems that were not in place before, for example, in order to try to maintain the plant populations that were there, because they are very much aware that if they overharvest, then there is erosion problems and floods and so on. And I'm actually done. Thank you for your attention. And I would also like to thank all the students and the colleagues whose work has contributed to this presentation, especially Julia Matali and Jaime Ojeda. Yes. think if you shout, I'll hear you.
And I was wondering if this reciprocity, if I understood correctly, it explains basically the stability that human and nature, the stability of human nature relationship, that you need this reciprocity to stabilize relationship with nature. So I was wondering, basically, why are we losing this equilibrium now? Like, what is missing this reciprocity? All the factors, why do you think now they are in pricing for the data from climate change? Like, at what point we're breaking reciprocity?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question just in case there's someone motivated in YouTube who's still listening. So your question is about, do we need these reciprocal relationships to be stable in order to have positive outcomes? And why are we losing these reciprocal relationships today? And I think if I understood correctly, you kind of assume that losing reciprocal relationships led us to the environmental crisis that we're seeing today. I think I wouldn't go that far. Human and the history is complex, right? And things happen at multiple levels, political levels, at economic levels, that have, I think, contributed to where we are today. I would not say that reciprocal relationships have existed for centuries in traditional societies and now are being broken by globalization. I don't think we do observe this. I mean, some societies have maintained relationships that are sustainable in a specific place and for a number of years, centuries, and others haven't. I mean, there's Jared Diamond's famous book, for example, talking about this. And reciprocal relationships can happen at individual level and can be established today if you decide to go out and take care of a patch of mountain somewhere. Or perhaps like taking care of your garden. They can happen at a group level with like associations. In Norway, there is an association for foraging, for example, a group of motivated people that go out foraging and teach themselves about it and try to take care of the places where they go foraging. And in some cases, they have been inscribed in culture. And that's very common, for example, in North American cultures. Where this notion of indebtedness and gratitude was very much part of the culture, of the ways in which people would govern themselves and govern their relationships with the land. I mean, in that case, for example, what broke these relationships was the settlement of Europeans. But for me, it's more like looking at case per case. There are different scales in which this may happen, and I would not expect these relationships to be infinite or to have always existed. Does this sort of answer your question? I think reciprocity is what happens in the relationship. A relationship is always changing. I mean, fishermen, like, I don't know, 50 years ago, the same people will not be the ones that are fishing. They will not have the same techniques. I have no idea about dolphin behavior and ecology, but perhaps something has changed in their behavior too because of other factors. I think you can observe reciprocity happening in different contexts at different moments, but the relationships are not necessarily stable. Okay. That's an example of how you're using a knowledge system to to try to understand knowledge. These are not like natural laws in the sense of like evolutionarily natural laws. There are patterns that are that repeat themselves, but mhm. Mhm. Yes, but cool.
Other questions?
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for the talk. I really like the concept. I just wanted to ask you, how would you? I'm sure there's a difference, but I want your perspective on how do you distinguish between farming and foraging with stewardship?
Yes, it's a gradient. We've been like wrecking our heads about this, and it is a gradient. So a lot of farming practices are used on species that we will usually consider wild just because they don't appear in a particular field, and there like you can have very intensive farming systems and less intensive farming systems and agroforestry and so on. There's no clear cut. Yeah, and many of the actual practices are the same. One second, there is someone.
Quick question. So from your talk, I see two kind of stewardship practices. One that have a direct benefit on your foraging, like you do something because the thing that you're going to forage is going to grow better, so there is a direct benefit. And other types that are actually, you do something to give it back to Earth just because you feel like you need to give back to Earth. And my question is, do you see the first type, the more direct benefit, if you like, more present in the Western world compared to the other, or not really?
I haven't made a distinction between these two motivations, because again, in any particular system, I would go and ask people what are their motivations, and the way that you evaluate motivations depends on the system on the evaluation grid that you use to evaluate it. So people may have motivations, may do things for an entirely spiritual motivation that may have very practical ecological impacts on the reproduction of the species. So then what is it? One or the other? It depends. It depends how you look at it and how you evaluate it. So I wouldn't necessarily distinguish the two. The two exist, but the kinds of impacts will also be different depending on how you evaluate the impacts. Does this make sense?
Thanks.
Questions?
Hi. Do you think the participatory science approach, like using, recording biodiversity with apps or stuff like that, can be a way to restore a kind of connection of people with nature, or is it not enough, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think I haven't done it myself, but there are some colleagues who are looking at these kinds of initiatives as new ways of getting people to connect with nature. And indeed, I mean, everything's valid, right? Because the focus of our studies so far has been more on like indigenous and local knowledge systems. I personally haven't invested a lot of time in looking at the ways that reciprocity happens like today with like nature, pro-nature associations, for example. But recently I was also thinking like, well, there's this trend of having like insect hotels, no, for example. I mean, this is very much something that we do here that has a, that is very much, I think you can be read from a lens of reciprocity as well, because we value insects and we value pollination and we know how good it is and we find them beautiful, and then we put these hotels because we want to support them. So it's a bit this idea as well.
Question.
Thank you. I have a very naive question. Just what is nature?
Well, there is no one definition of nature. That's also something that we spent some time on it. Nature depends on who you ask, not on what nature is. So depending on the there are multiple definitions of nature, and people will act on nature depending on the definition that they use. And there's environmental humanities and other like environmental anthropology. There's many scholars in the natural sciences that spend a lot of time thinking about this. Yeah. You have my email. Feel free to drop me a line if you want to.
Thank you very much. So
Is it working? Yeah. Oh. Numerous. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for still being here after this very long day. I'm Mathilde and I'm here to talk a bit about my work. So my work belongs to the very large field of human and wildlife coexistence. And in fact, I'm particularly interested in the perception of stakeholders toward different scavenger species. So here we go. Among the diverse impacts of global change, his role as amplificatory of human and wildlife conflict have been a bit underestimated. But of course, as natural resources become increasingly scarce, the competition for water, food, and space is increasing, and therefore it leading to more frequent and more severe interaction across the globe. Human and wildlife conflict already threaten vulnerable species. They alter ecosystem functioning, and of course, they impact the well-being of local communities, economically, socially, and emotionally. That's why it's essential to like the human. It's important to include human sciences in conservation to understanding and improving human and wildlife coexistence strategies. This perspective is part of the shifting in conservation sciences, one which is integrating a lot of disciplines. Great. So human dimensions such as belief, values, emotion, and perceptions are playing a central role in shaping how humans related to wildlife. By exploring how humans perceive species, we would like to identify the key levers and to obtain a more peaceful coexistence. So our study model is scavengers. They form a very heterogeneous guild, which have a very important impact on landscapes. Yes, in fact, by removing decomposing carcasses, they avoid some disease transmission, and of course, they help in nutrients recycling. In mountainous grazing systems, scavengers have a very important role because they avoid to necessitate very costly and difficult carcass collections, right? But the livestock carcasses represent an important food resource for the species, and it creating a double-way relationship, quite reciprocity, that is very important. And that's why we would like to understand how farmers perceive scavengers species. So we do face-to-face interview with livestock farmers. The aim is to get some information about their own characteristics, their farming practices, their carcass management, and of course, some of their perception about the impact of wildlife on their daily life. So we also recorded their environmental values using a scale called the New Ecological Paradigm. So we assess some statement of the NEP. It's a Wiley scale used in psychology to measure the relationship between human and nature. Right. We recorded the perception of scavengers toward an ordinal scale ranking from very harmful to very beneficial. And we analyze it through Bayesian method. In fact, classical frequentist method are not well suited for those type of data because they assume an equal space between different levels, which is not the case for ordinal data. Okay, so our study was conducted in the southern French Alps. This area hosted several griffon vulture colonies, and of course the wolf is present in all the study area. Okay, we assessed the perception of 8 different scavenger species that we grouped into 4 categories, and we record 25 different farmers that could impact the farmer's perception toward scavengers. After what, we compare models. Okay, let's start with all scavenger species. So here you can see so the points are representing the probability to obtain one level of the ordinal scale. For example, we see here that if they believe that we are facing today an ecological crisis increases, the probability that they expose a harmful perception of scavengers decreases. And at the same time, the probability to obtain a neutral or beneficial perception increases. So we can conclude that the more people perceive that we are nowadays facing an ecological crisis, and the more beneficial is their perception of those species. At the opposite, the more the farmers were agreed that poaching can be a regulatory tool, an acceptable regulatory tool, and the more their perception of scavengers is harmful. Okay, so those elements can let us to conclude that the perception of farmers towards scavengers is not only shaped by direct by direct experience with wildlife or by farming practices, is more deeply rooted by broader worldview, right? We have also here an impact of product, and meat producers tend to have a more harmful perception of scavengers than other producers. Notice that type of product induces a lot of farming characteristics. So if we look deeper to 2 conflictive species, the grey wolf, of course, is the main predator in the area, and notice that it returned in France through the eastern part of our Swiss study region. And for the griffon vulture, maybe you have known that from 2 decades, some farmers reported griffon vultures attacking livestock, notably in Spain and particularly during the breeding seasons. That events rising the tension with these species, and sometimes it shifts the perception of the scavengers for certain farmers. Here we found quite similar results. Okay, so the perception of those species is also affected by their belief of ecological crisis and by the accordance for poaching. But if the perception toward wolf and vulture is also affected by project. The perception of wolf is quite largely impacted by the hunting practice. Hunters tend to have a more harmful perception of wolf than non-hunters. Okay, so our conclusion can be that, in fact, values are very important to shape the farmer's perception toward wildlife. And these results are consistent with literature. In fact, Monfredo and colleagues show that mutualist worldview, the people who have a mutualist worldview tend to have a more positive attitude regarding controversial species. In the second part of our study, we compare the perception of farmers with some interviews that have done in Spain and in Portugal, thanks to Fatima Gigante. We found important cross-country differences regarding all scavengers, generalists, and vultures. But interestingly, when we go to predators, we don't find any differences. So farmers from all this country perceive wolf as a very harmful species. Okay, of course, the recovery of large carnivore is a success for conservation, for sure, but it also brings with it some very important question about how humans related to wildlife. And this question tends to surpass some national differences. As a conclusion, I would say that the perception of wildlife is is shaped by a lot of different factors, such as environmental values, but also culture, national differences, and field experience, but also farming activities. This finding highlight the importance to take attention to the social parts of conservation. It's very essential to reinforce our ability to coexist with wildlife. Just to conclude, notice that local stakeholders are not like bystanders of the biodiversity. They are really important actors, and they act in an ecosystem that we all aim to protect. So it's very necessary to talk with them and to do it with as much as neutrality, respect, and humility as possible. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Any question? Yes.
Thank you very much. Just a question about the interviews. Did you have any difficulties finding people to interview? Were any people not very...
So we did some with farmers, like so the area is a very mountainous area. So there in those parts, you don't have intensive farming activities, only very small herbs. And so we talk with farmers. In other steps, we also interview hunters, rural inhabitants, and we try to do this job in like different countries nowadays. But so we have a questionnaire. We try to follow like some question, but you know, with humans sometimes. So the interview can be 30 minutes or 5 hours, depending on the person. But yeah, we have a questionnaire, more or less.
Okay, I was wondering, as it's kind of a hot topic for farmers or hunters, maybe some people would refuse to speak with you.
Some. And that's why it's very important to come with a neutral etiquette. If you come with like an NGO or something like that, they will close the door. So it's very important I say, okay, I'm a scientist. I'm just here to talk with you and try to have some information from you and listen to you. And in fact, those peoples, most of them are not talking with a lot of people in their daily life. So they're quite happy to have someone who knock on the door and just ask questions about their farming practices.
Thank you.
Very lovely presentation that you have there.
Stressful.
No, it's very interesting. I have one interesting question, which is almost linked to a question. Is the way the word stakeholders there, does it mean that the farmers are also part of like conservation? Because when you say someone is a stakeholder, that means they're part of what you're doing. So are they part of the conservation in that area as well? Like the people that you question, because you're saying broadening our knowledge of stakeholder perceptions. Are they like stakeholders in conservation or stakeholders in just farming?
Do you mean if they know which species is stakeholder or not? What is your question?
So a stakeholder, usually when you're in conservation, you're referring to someone who is part of the same program that you're doing. Like CNRS has some stakeholders or people that are part of like CNRS or people we relate to. So calling farmers stakeholders, are they also part of the conservation or they're just farmers and you're calling them stakeholders?
No, we did also with hunters, because you know that some after hunting activity, they leave a lot of piece of meat in the middle, and so they give a lot of food, in fact, to the scavenger species. So of course we focus on those two stakeholders, farmers and hunters, because they are the most the people who are more in interaction with scavengers, right?
Okay, I just wanted to share with you, there's an interesting paper that was published this year, the total economic value of services provided by vultures in Southern Africa. Yeah, if, I don't know, maybe whenever you do like more stakeholder meetings, it's very interesting to share how like these scavengers are very important for like,
Okay,
for
we
many
can talk
things.
later if you want.
Hi, thank you for your talk, very interesting. I was wondering, what word do you put behind farmers? Because I see sheep on your presentation. So livestock owners will be very different and might perceive these scavengers very differently than, for example, shepherds. So have you talked to that kind of people, like the people that are actually up in the mountains with the livestock and the people that will actually maybe have to deal with the scavengers or something like that? Have you talked to these people? Because I think their perception would be very interesting. It might be very different from the livestock.
The mountain, is it?
Yeah, for example, or like that go up with the livestock. Maybe I'm seeing sheep. That's just so it's easy, and cattle and stuff like that.
In fact, in the Alps, there are a lot of sheep.
Yeah, because in the Alps, there's like a lot of transhumans. Like you take the livestock up to the mountain.
The idea is that I'm always doing the interview during winters. I'm trying to do that. It's because during winter, they're at home and the livestock is at home. So it's easier. And also they have a lot of time. Sometimes it's difficult to manage if you go during summer or during spring with farmers because it's a very hard job. And so sometimes they don't have the time to do. So in winter, it's easier too. And so you can meet breeder easily in winter. It's okay.
That was the last question.
Okay.
It's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next presentation is going to be Luigi.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Louis Quichot and I'm a first-year PhD student at the Biogeco Laboratory in Bordeaux. And I'm working on the restoration of social ecosystems in the landscape of the Anthropocene with the example of the riparian wetlands of the Gironde estuary. So my study area is the floodplain of the Gironde estuary that you can see here on the spectrum in color. And it's a very complex social ecosystem that mainly consisted of riparian wetlands. And riparian wetlands are areas that are regularly submerged by the waters of the estuary and connected to these waters. So for instance, riparian forest, salt marshes, reed beds or mud flats, etc. And they host numerous non-human species, as you know, but they also have been invested by the human species for 1 million years in a great diversity of ways, including, starting from the 16th century, large modernization projects that have been implemented at the national scale and imposed on the territory of the estuary. And these projects consisted in the construction of dikes all along the floodplain of the estuary, in order to increase the profits from agricultural practices, but also increase the political control in the area. And so these ended up in disconnecting most of the floodplain from the estuary. And so most of the floodplain does not consist of riparian wetlands anymore. And so these completely changed the species that were able to live in this floodplain, but also the practices that humans were able to conduct in this area. Other modernization projects, such as the onset of industrial agriculture, but also the construction of portuary and energy production infrastructures in the area, that also changed the social ecosystem. But still today, some small patches of riparian wetlands still exist on the estuary, even though they have been greatly marginalized through the last centuries. So in the end, we have a very mosaic landscape with a great diversity of patches that reflects the diversity of ways that humans have invested this landscape. On the left, you have a patch of riparian wetland that still exists today and where local people are hunting today. But most of the floodplain consists of a diked area where different agricultural practices are being conducted. So in the face of the sea level rise, but also climate change and also the biodiversity crisis and many other elements, there has been a large dynamic in the last 20 years or so to rethink the future of the social ecosystem and on what trajectory it should go, including the implementation of different restoration projects all along the estuary, so the red dots here, that are actually very different kind of projects that have different targets and that have different trajectories. So they have different implications for both humans and non-humans. And they already kind of give us a sense of what the future of the social ecosystem could look like following these different trajectories. So that is why I'm interested in exploring the different possible restoration trajectories of the Gironde estuary social ecosystem and what their implications could be for both humans and non-humans. And here I'm going to focus more specifically on humans, and especially on the way that different groups of humans are connecting to the restored area through different perspectives and different practices, and how some of these practices and perspectives are being reinforced and being advantaged in the restoration projects, leading the social ecosystem on different trajectories. So here are just like a first few insights from the exploratory ethnographical fieldwork that I'm connecting on 2 case studies, 2 different restoration projects that follow different trajectories. So these are more like hypotheses than firm results for now. The reason why I'm focusing on both biology and culture is because they are both like components of the diversity of life on Earth, and they should be looked as such and studied as such. But also they are both like being eroded. So if we're going to study the erosion of biological diversity and biological component in restoration projects, we can also study the cultural components. But also, if we want to live in a society that does not destroy the biological diversity around us, it is important to let other alternatives to this dominant system to exist and emerge with time. So the first case study is the restoration project located in Mortagne-sur-Gironde at Bas-Maubert, which is on the right bank of the estuary. And it consists in the restoration of a patch of diked land that was used for intensive agriculture into a patch of riparian wetland after the destruction of a seawall during a storm. And this project has been a huge success for regarding the biological criteria, as different species of fish and macrocrustacean have returned to the area in order to feed and reproduce. But regarding human practices, well, it's a bit more complex because it seems that one of the main ways that humans are connecting to this restored area is through the naturalist and scientific approach and practices that are performed by the organizations that are leading this project. What's interesting is that the other humans that are living nearby or using the nearby reborn wetland more north or south of the restoration project, here and here, for a whole of a set of different practices, such as, for example, the fishing of different species of fish and macrocrustacean, but also the hunting and collecting of different plants and animals, like thrushes, for example, and migratory birds. And these, like the local human populations used to really rely upon these practices, and they were really important for their social organization. But with their integration into the market economy, these practices have been marginalized, and people don't really rely on them as much as they used to. And what is interesting is that recently in this restoration project, the organizations leading it have started to encourage these kind of practices in the project, such as specifically grazing. So it seems that this project has departed already from the Western ideal of restoration, that is the restoration of a patch of wild nature, devoid of humans, and through which you can only connect through the naturalist and scientific approaches, to an ideal of restoration that integrates different perspectives and different practices, including the naturalist one, but not only this one. The second case study is the restoration restoration project, located in Saint-Louis-de-Montferrand, which is located more inland. It follows a different trajectory since it does not aim at restoring a patch of reborn wetland, but rather within a diked area to transform the industrial agricultural practices into agroecological practices. And the reason for that is that in the nearby patches next to the restoration project, you can find a great deal of non-human species, including some protected species like the summer snowflake here. So it's a very interesting site for biological diversity, even though it's a very different one that you can find in reborn wetlands. You can also find different human practices, such as grazing, hunting, harvesting of different plants and animals, and there seems to be a very strong attachment of humans to this place, to its ecologies and to its species. And actually, these practices, they maintain the good ecological conditions for the other species, including the protected species, to exist and thrive. And this seems to be recognized by the actors of the restoration project that do not aim at restoring either a patch of wild nature, but rather at reviving a place where both humans and non-humans can live together and whose lives are entangled. So just take a message. Restoration, just like science, is a cultural phenomenon and a cultural practice, which is not a bad thing to say. And different variations of these practices can lead social ecosystems on different trajectories. So it's very important to study what these different trajectories are doing, of course, to the biological diversity, but also to different perspectives and practices through which humans connect to these non-humans. The main ideal of restoration throughout the 20th century and of conservation was the restoration and conservation of wild nature, that is nature devoid of humans and through which you can only connect with through the naturalist and scientific link. And it seems now that there is a new trajectory and a new ideal of restoration, at least in my cases, where the intent is more to revive places where both cultural and biological diversities can thrive and humans and non-humans co-survive and co-evolve together. So just here, 2 book recommendations that I think are very interesting for all ecologists that are interested in conservation, restoration, and the Anthropocene in general. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Any question?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to know why you choose to look at fish and macrocrustaceans for the non-humans and how it shaped the goals of the restoration.
I mean, I choose them because most of the studies that focused on the biological success of this restoration project focused on the fish and macrocrustaceans. In part because most of the species that were marginalized with the construction of dikes impacted these kind of species who could not enter into the floodplain areas anymore because of this disconnection between the water and the floodplain. So I think this was like one of the main target for biologists and ecologists. But it seems that it was also a success I've read in the reports for vegetation, but also for migratory birds.
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah. So I was wondering about this the wild mindset to reuse now this area. I was wondering if it's really coming from like a willingness of the people to make this area like a bit closer to wildlife, or if it's actually because there is no really interesting commercial value of this land. Like, for example, you cannot do industrial farming because probably you cannot pass with all the machine. But eventually, if you ask them if there is a way to dry up this land and make this agriculture possible, would they actually do it?
Well, they have done it for the last centuries, yeah. They have like built dikes all around the wetlands in order to use them for agricultural practices, and in the 19th and also 20th century for intensive agricultural practices. And this has been the case until the 1999 storm. In the first case study that I'm showing, that destroyed the seawall. And because of that, the Conservatoire du Littoral actually bought this area in order to build a restoration project. So they could have rebuilt the dike, but they didn't. I would also add that the riparian wetlands are in the Western world habitats that are thought and fit for human and for human civilization. And that is one of the reasons why these areas were diked in the first place, because it was seen as unfit for humans, even though they were humans living in them. And so maybe these kind of thinking led the organization, like the actors of the restoration projects, to think that this area was a patch of wild nature, and that no other practices could be done in this area. But lately they have reintroduced grazing in the area, so they might have changed their mind.
One last question. No. Then we can move on to the next one.
Thank you very much. So
Okay. We don't have to push any. No, it works. Okay, okay. Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be there to talk to you about the characteristic of nature-based intervention to promote human-nature connectedness. But before that, I wanted to share a bit about where I come from. So that was my PhD. It was about genetic diversity and ecosystem functioning in rivers. It was a big project, a big fundamental project extending from genes to ecosystem. But at the end, I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in research because of the environmental impact of my work, and also the feeling that I was just producing another fundamental PhD with no real world application. So I was a bit lost. And I needed to take time to think about what I want as a researcher for my future. So I take this time and I decided that I wanted as much as possible reduce the ecological footprint of my work. Also that I don't want to manipulate living beings anymore. I wanted to include humans, and I want to focus on more applied projects. Okay, so those might have seemed difficult to find. But now, and for the next 2 years, I'm working in human-nature connectedness in the team of Gladys Barragan-Jason. So I'm in the French Pyrenees, in Ariège. And I feel better now because Protourism it's a multidisciplinary project, so it's a mix of psychology, ecology, and sociology. And also, I feel like it's more applied. So yeah, it won for me. And remember, you can always switch field if you need it at one time of your career. So keep this in mind. So if we come back to human-nature connectedness, it's a psychological construct describing the extent to which human includes the natural world in their sense of self or perceive themselves as part of nature. It has different facets that have been identified in the literature. So there's a cognitive, a behavioral, and an affective component, referring to the knowledge and belief you hold about nature, to the action you take for nature, the experiences you have in it, and to the feelings nature evokes in you. And what's really interesting for us is that it is linked to human health, both physically and mentally, but also to pro-environmental behaviors and values. Okay, so it seems interesting to improve this human-nature connectedness for global health of everyone, I would say. So the question is how to do it. And in a meta-analysis from 2022, Gladys identified key factors that promote human-nature connectedness. So she tested contact with nature, associated or not with mindfulness, or to environmental education. And she also tested environmental education, but indoor. And she found that contact with nature associated with mindfulness is the most efficient combination. And what didn't work was indoor environmental education. So exactly what we do a lot as scientists. So keep this in mind also. Okay. And as expected, she found again the link with human health, both physically and mentally, and the link with pro-environmental behavior, which is a proxy of nature welfare. Okay. But beyond the published studies, a huge source of data is missing. Can you guess? It's all the interventions that have been created and that are currently done by all the environmental awareness structures. And of course, there is no database compiling this intervention to my knowledge for now. So the first objective of the postdoc right now is to identify key factors behind the effectiveness of an intervention. And to do so, we will rely on the pre-existing intervention of more than 100 environmental structures. So first, we will explore the key factors of intervention, and next we will measure the impact on the audience. To do this, we ask the structures several questions about the structures itself, so the size, the name, the location, about the audience, how many there were, how old they were, and were they voluntary or not. About the intervention also, the intention behind the design of an intervention, the themes covered and the activities done, and about the session, so the frequency, the duration, and the ecosystem in which it took place. Okay, to measure the impact on the audience, We will use human-nature connectedness. We can talk about the measure later. Human health still, pro-environmental behaviors still. And I want to add pro-social behaviors and values because I think the hypothesis is that empathy for nature will promote empathy for humans. Okay, I will not show you the second part today because it's for this fall. And I started the postdoc like 5 months ago, so it's the beginning of everything. So today we are just going to explore a bit of the key factors. I wanted to show you this again because these are all the structures and the networks we are in contact with. So you can see that they come from the field of art, of education, of science. You can see little regional networks such as Graines Occitanie, but also big NGOs like WWF. We find them using our network, but also a standardized research online that I will not show you here the details. Voilà. Okay, so here are the location of the intervention, all in France. You see it's pretty well scattered, so I guess it's a good sign. There are some hotspots like Paris and Montpellier, and we have a little sampling bias around Toulouse because this is where we come from, so pretty normal. About the session location distribution, here you have the number of answers. You can see that almost half of the session are mostly outdoors, whereas only a quarter are mostly indoors. So for us, it goes in the right direction because you now know that contact with nature is key to improve human-nature connectedness. If we look a bit more about what people are doing when they are outdoor, they are going a lot in rivers, in wetlands, in forests, in urban parks, and not so much in mountain, in marine areas, and in national parks. So I guess this is for accessibility reason, but still cool to know that there is a lack of some ecosystems. And for the indoor natural settings, if we look a bit about what people are doing, they use a lot of artificial nature sounds and visuals. They use also, but less, real animals, real plants, real scents, and they use less again. They disguise as plants or animal, which is pretty cute. So we'll see if it will work. You see that there is a dominance of the artificial visual. Here, of course, with a screen is super easy. And we know that beyond this parameter, like sound-based intervention work pretty well. And for the other factor, we'll find out. Okay, here another graph showing you the activity type and the responses still. You can see that some activities are pretty common, like teaching of knowledge, naturalist observation, and sensory stimulation. And some are less used, like tasting or internal attention practice. But we can add a bit of color for ages. So children in green and adults in pink. And they are pretty well, everyone is everywhere, I would say. So there is no link between the activity choice and the age of participants. And just to finish, I want you to link the intention behind the design of an intervention to the activity done, just by curiosity. So here is the model to predict awe, so the intent to create this feeling of amazement toward nature. And I just made a quick model selection. And what you can see here with the bold factor is that when people want to inspire awe, they use empathy and mindfulness, again, mindfulness. So maybe these activities are good to trigger emotion, but this is just the structure's point of view, so we will see if it works really on participants. Okay, we can look at to another intention, like create an experience of nature. And for this one, obviously a lot of activities and themes came out. It's less easy to read, but still understandable. As long as you are in nature, almost anything become an experience of nature. Okay. I just want to share you the long-term objective. So today I present to you this part. This fall, we will ask the participants and the audience what they think about this and if this works for them. But the long-term objective is to use all these key factors that works to combine them into an ideal intervention and to see if we can have better results than for a standard intervention in increasing our 4 factors that you know perfectly now. And this is called randomized control trial. This is cool to infer real causal link, but this is for next year, so stay tuned. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Any question?
Thank you very much. I really like this presentation. It's not the best question because it's not the main goal of your postdoc. But still,
okay, it's not a problem.
I was wondering maybe as you see now changes that has to be made in interventions, maybe you have an idea of how we have to change how we teach ecology, biology in the university, and maybe we are the first to change our practices at the university.
Yeah, I don't know if your aim is just to transmit knowledge, maybe it's okay. But if you want to change the relationship between human and nature in this case, maybe it's not the best, and mindfulness and contact with nature should be better. But I think what's really important, in fact, is it's in childhood also. So it have been shown that repeated contacts and have an emotional link with a learn somewhere, as you were saying, is the best way to just have this connection. So yeah, maybe we have to think about it at university also. Yeah, going outside.
Because now I'm thinking that you changed your way of working because of your relationship to nature. So maybe it's a good sign that we have to take into account our relationship to nature while becoming scientists.
Yeah, maybe. Personally, I think so. I think it's super important to feel aligned with what you are doing. And do you really think that it goes in the right direction for you? I think it's a question you have to ask to yourself. So, but this is so personal. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, there is another one. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thanks. I'm just really curious about how you're going to measure health impacts.
The health impact, it will depend on the class of age, but what can we see? We can ask, there are validated questionnaire about like mental health and everything. Yeah, always self-reported. This is, yeah, always a question, but we have a PhD in our team that is working on acquire physiological clues for human nature connectedness and everything. So maybe you can take physiological measure, but for us, I think it's going to be only questionnaire. But yeah, it's always hard.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was curious, among the cases that you've seen, were there some cases that they're with adults because there are some nature retreats. So did you see some cases trying to increase the human nature connectedness for adults?
In retreat, you said? Like
our retreat is just a
example I can think of, but I
Yeah.
guess people go for nature excursions and things, but I was wondering if that kind of approaches also
Are
in the organizations. Yeah.
we are interested in. So yeah, if you have example, please give me the name of the association. I will glad to add it in my pool. But we cannot be sure that people will answer. So we have to find structures that are really motivated to make the evaluation with participants and everything. So if you personally know someone, please come. But yes, I really wanted to open it the most wide as possible. That's why we also have like theater company that are doing theater for children, and yeah, that's why you have people dressed like animals. But for me, yeah, I believe in art also to touch people. So yeah, the more wide as possible. Thank you.
Maybe one last question.
Thank you for your talk. I'm sorry if you mentioned it, I might have missed it. But when evaluating the impact on the feeling of connectedness to nature, will you be interested in the effect directly after the intervention, or will you be able to have some sort of monitoring of maybe long-term effects?
Yeah, we wanted to have just a measure just after the intervention, and maybe 3 months later. It's always hard to have more because people are just lost in nature. So yeah, it's always hard, but it's interesting, of course, to know this is really important. But a lot of people are doing really cool stuff on schools. So I think it's going to be easier to have year and year following. So I hope we will do it. But yeah, I think 3 months will be the maximum. Maybe 6, but yeah, it's always hard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now just a couple of words to finish the day, and I need your focus for maybe 5 more minutes because I have some important points. So as you know, there is the poster session right after. And I hope, well, you probably already understood yesterday, but just in case you didn't, there will be a lottery at the poster session. And so the goal is every time you go to a poster, you get a stamp from the poster holder, owner, or however you call it. And when you get 4, you get a lottery ticket. Yeah, so that's just about it. And those are the different things you can get at the lottery. So it's quite good. You have Okay, so that's the difference. Things you can get. So you can have camera traps, an S box with a camera inside, some jam. Yep, nice stuff. So you can get 1 ticket maximum, but please go to more than 4 posters, of course. And that's both today and tomorrow and the next poster session. So you don't need to do it all today either. That's really up to you. Okay, so I think that's it for the poster session. Not for the lottery, but then the poster session is going to be just after, so you can follow like the organization team, but it's just on another building, a bit further right. There is also some signs. Well, you won't get lost. Please, for all those that have posters tomorrow, you also need to install it tomorrow morning during breakfast. So yeah, maybe come a bit earlier if you want more breakfast time, but that's tomorrow. And yes, so during the posters, like you can, we said that every person having a poster can bring a drink to share with people coming. So that's really, of course, up to everyone to have whatever they want, but there will be more drinks on the side coming from yesterday, leftovers, and new ones as well, and the kombucha from yesterday. Yep, I think that's all. And then last important point, there is the walk tour tomorrow in Montpellier. I think about 30 of you registered. So there will be like 2 teams with 2 different times to visit the city, and that's 1-hour walks. So you will receive by email tonight the 2 time slots. We try to make it match as much as possible as what you said, but it needs to be 15 and 15 pretty much. So you'll see. Yes, and that's 10 euros. So please bring 10 euros by cash. Yeah, thanks. Any question maybe about the lottery or the posters or whatever? All clear? Thank you very much.